Hi there, I'm Sai. Welcome to my video called Nugget of Wisdom. Today I really want to talk about journalism and the really interesting topic of debate that is currently being expressed in the media about Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson is obviously an American sort of media journalist, host, who was with Fox News and left Fox News, fired or left, who knows. But basically, he's become very prominent. He's very outspoken. Some people would call him a right-winger. Anti-wokeism, sort of leaning on the side of Donald Trump and so on. Very charismatic guy. But he basically has become very prominent on X, getting amazing amounts of people watching his various interviews with people. And he has recently just announced that he was in Russia and in Moscow, and he was doing an interview with Vladimer Putin, 45 minutes to an hour long, with a promise that it would be unedited, and that Elon Musk had indicated that he would put it unedited on X for everyone to be able to watch. What's interesting about this is that the debate that's going on at the moment. So you've obviously got people who are, pro Tucker, anti-establishment, anti the Democrats, who are really, putting it out there that they admire what Tucker is doing, that it's about freedom of speech. That he is basically giving everybody the opportunity to hear all sides of the argument, especially arguments which relate to wars and really important decisions that have been made in society. On the other side, you've got people who, traditional media, and the traditional media he has attacked for being sort of propaganda driven. And obviously, understandably, they've come out and said, we disagree with you, and we don't like what you're doing, and also they're sort of, pushing the idea that he's sort of a pro-Putin, he's disloyal, to America, sort of a traitor. So it's interesting to see this. My take is a bit different. I see it very differently. First of all, I think it's a really, really positive thing that's happening here. It's probably not happening in the most beautiful way, but it's happening in a way, it's like growing pains, that society needs to get to a space where traditional ways of communicating with people are no longer really up to the job. The idea that you could have state-run media dominated by corporate advertising, media that was influenced through the political agenda and the military-industrial complex, to be part of the propaganda for driving the war machine. And whether the war was wrong or right, or wars were wrong or right, it's obvious, and you look through history, to get people on side, you use the media. And what you tend to do is you demonize one side, and the other side you take the view that they're the angels. There's a wrong side and a right side, and you go much further. The wrong side is evil and satanic, and you make it similar. You sort of compare it to Hitler and the Nazis and so on, or whatever despotic leader, Stalin, whatever you can think of. You really demonize one side, and the other side you say their butter wouldn't melt in their mouths. They're amazing. They're angels. Everything they're doing is right. And then what happens is people get on board to this, and they give up their sons and daughters to go into the military, and they fight wars. And in general, what happens is the people who basically are pushing this ideology are politicians and senior military people and groups with vested interests. Don't participate in those wars. They don't send their children. They don't stand in the front line. And loads of people then, through the hero's journey, loyalty to Queen and country, to the flag, through freedom, to democracy, go out there and often, sadly, have been hoodwinked into giving up and, doing the most courageous things to protect society and protect our values and so on. But often what happens is, even though the values and the morals that are spread about things are perfectly fine, the people who spread them don't give a monkeys about the values, especially in this modern world. And that there's an undercurrent here of, well, let's tell everybody how important it is to fight off the enemy, because this enemy is going to destroy the world, is a despot. Let's compare him or her to Hitler. But actually what it's really about is our influence in the world. It's being the number one, having the biggest share of the pie, getting the resources of other countries, being dominant and in control. It's very narcissistic. And what's been happening is that traditional media has been all caught up in this for generations. And in some cases, it probably was a good thing, because there were lots of despotic people around in the world who did despotic things. And I mightn't be here if it wasn't for some of these systems that we had in place. So I'm not trying to judge really the past. The past is the past, and it is what it is. And the best thing with the past is to learn from it. And if you want to learn from the past here, you'll realize that the world is becoming one tribe, that wars are desperate measures and last resort measures, and especially in this world where there's nowhere to go. You start and trigger a war with another major power, chances are the blowback is going to cause havoc and destruction and terrible suffering for millions of people. So in this current and future world, you need a different approach. You need a more evolved approach. And so Tucker Carlson, by doing this, is really marking out a very, very different world where we, the people, get to hear all sides. We don't just listen to the propaganda of one or two organizations or a small number with very simple arguments demonizing one side. What we do is we get to listen to all the arguments. We get to listen to the people on the other side. And I think that's a great thing. And obviously, Putin has his own story. It doesn't matter really whether it's wrong or right. We can be the judge of that, the citizens, the people who vote. It's time we were empowered. And to be empowered means we can judge what we think about him and his responses to questions. And so I think this is a step change. And what it really, really indicates is that the traditional methodology, the traditional political and corporate media, military of defense, so the network of people, need to wake up quick. Because people will not buy into that old way of doing things anymore, and they won't trust it. Because when there are so many opportunities to interview people in different ways, it becomes clear that you see serious contradictions. Here's a really, really great contradiction. So the UN estimate, and I quote the UN because whether the figures are wrong or right, they're not going to be majorly biased. You're not getting figures about how many people have died in a war from the countries that are involved in the wars directly. So it's the best we have. But the UN are talking about, I think at the moment, and it changes on a daily basis, but you're looking at something like about 700 children have been killed in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. The Gaza-Israeli conflict, it's now about 17,000. When you look at that, there's serious questions to be asked here. Number one, it's totally terrible, unacceptable, tragic that any child is killed. But if you're listening to one side demonizing the other, so you look at, say, the legacy journalism in the US is demonizing Putin, you have to say to yourself, hold on a second here. If you're supporting Israel, the Israeli government, and you're using them in a way as a proxy, and you have a conflict which is in reality much smaller than the Ukraine-Russian conflict, where you have a small place called Gaza with a alleged terrorist organization doing, committing atrocities in Israel, and then basically a reaction. You would not expect that number of children to be losing their lives. You'd almost expect the opposite. You'd expect a few hundred in the Israeli-Gaza conflict and thousands in the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So what that says to me is that the messaging we're getting from our governments and from our politicians and from our legacy media is suspect. And that if you listen to them and their moralistic arguments, you can't really trust them. They're just not trustworthy. Because there's no way on this planet that 17,000 young children should be dying in Gaza. And the reality here, the reality of it all, is that the anger and hatred from the Jewish population, the conservative Jewish population in Israel, and the Netanyahu government, and the outpouring of just pure raw emotion after the atrocities were committed on them, has led them to commit atrocities themselves. We all know this, to the point where they have basically ethnically cleansed, or are trying to ethnically cleanse, a whole population of people. Civilians, children, doesn't matter. And the evidence is all over the place. If you look at what the military are doing, what they're saying, I was even in a debate with some Israelis where they had a guy on a short YouTube video just demonizing the people of Gaza. They deserve it. The children have died because it's all their parents' fault. When I put on any kind of balanced view and said, hold on, the deaths of any child is wrong. You guys have suffered trauma, I understand this, but what you're doing, two wrongs don't make a right. I got vitriol from them. You could feel the hatred. So they're basically trying to just wipe out the people of Gaza. The conflict between Ukraine and Russia is very different. This is about, in my view, the Russians trying to basically teach the Ukrainians a big lesson from their point of view, destroy their infrastructure, give them, the access to basic things that they need for their economy and society run to be taken out, make Ukraine a really horrible place to live in. And the majority of the deaths are incredibly hundreds of thousands of young men, Russian and Ukrainian soldiers. But I don't believe that the Russians are trying to ethnically cleanse the Ukrainians, because I would guess that Ukrainians and Russians are very closely related. And that's part of the issue in Ukraine, is that in the Donbass region there's lots of ethnic Russians who want to be part of, to sort of have Russian culture and Russian language, and there's other people who want to be part of Europe. But I don't believe it's about ethnically cleansing. And that's why the numbers are so different. But if you hear anyone in the legacy media, in the US or UK talk, it's as if everything that's happening in Israel, just don't worry about it. It's fine. We don't like to see children being killed, but it's just the way it is. Whereas in Russia, there's a demonization going on. And I'm pretty certain that 600 children, 600, 700 children have been tragically killed in Russia. I'm pretty certain the US and UK media would be happy to turn that into a massive story and show the bodies of the children and the horrors of the parents. But they're absolutely not interested in what's going on in Gaza, in my view. And despite the protests, despite The Hague and South Africa, the very UN processes that exist and they signed up to say to Israel, stop doing with this, don't do any more, it's completely ignored by the West. So getting back to Tucker, when Tucker Carlson interviews Putin, there's no legitimacy from any organization in the West to demonize Tucker Carlson. We, the public, can judge for ourselves and then use our votes to decide what we think about the interview and what he has said or hasn't said. I believe in free speech. America, and mostly the majority of American people, believe in free speech. And free speech means talking and asking questions to somebody even if you don't like them. And Tucker Carlson is his own man. He can ask Putin lots of difficult questions. He can put it to Putin, ask him the questions about the invasion and the kind of the war tactics and all that stuff that's going on. And I hope he does. On the downside of this, I think that because Western governments and because they're so caught up in the past, they haven't realized that if they don't change and grow and evolve, then you're going to get potentially extremist journalists who are one-sided, who are going to use an interview with somebody that they like because of their values and their ideology and their sort of political agenda. They're going to use that to try and get people and eyeballs to look at it and say, oh, where would you? So the people who are in power at the moment don't understand that they're going to lose because the whole system has changed. We're not talking about TV screens and a few channels and some big corporate, CNN and Fox. That's all going. Really, the older generation still buy into this. The younger generation will not be interested or want to watch any of this stuff. And so if they don't, it's change or die. If they don't change, it will come. And it's coming. Tucker Carlson and Joe Rogan and all these other people who have podcasts. It doesn't cost anything to put these videos up. They're attracting loads of people. They're listening to all different ideas. They've got a very different way of doing journalism. Those people are now becoming the ones in charge, the ones that have the power in the media. The problem with that is that they may become the very thing that we don't want them to be. It's very easy for the controllers to give up the control to other controllers who then take control themselves and are worse. And so that's why it's really important that we start to think about ways of making media work in a very independent and open way. So a really good example here is, if I had my way, the debate that would occur with Putin would include Zelensky and would include Biden. The presidents, the prime ministers of the three main countries that are involved in this. We know who they are, right? You could involve the Europeans and British, but in reality, I would say the three main characters you'd want here would be Zelensky, Putin, and Biden. You would then have an unedited debate where you would take questions from Ukraine, from America, from Russia. You would analyze those questions to find out how many people had put them, what the top questions were. So if everybody wanted to, ask Putin if he was, a despot or he was, complicit in genocide or whatever, you would ask those questions. So you'd use a democratic process and an unbiased process to put your questions together. Those questions then, when you ask the leaders, you would give them an opportunity before the event to have those questions so they could come back with the answers. So you wouldn't just catch them off guard. You'd give them the opportunity to basically be ready to answer some of those questions. You'd then also have the opportunity for people online to just ask questions. So based on the debate and the answer to these initial questions, just ask questions. A mother, a farmer, a soldier, whatever. And somebody from America, somebody from Ukraine could ask Biden, could ask Putin. You'd have a set amount of time, and in effect, the person who was the role of someone like Tucker Carlson would just be like a referee. They would be a kind of invisible, making sure that all of the protocols for timing, giving each of the speakers a chance to speak and debate were adhered to. But also, if the debate started wandering off or people started getting abusive to each other, that they could come in and stop it. And then once that debate was over, it would be published onto a channel where everybody in the world could see it. And then all the comments that people put on could be assessed by people like Tucker Carlson, like Joe Rogan. Guys who have their own views and their own perspectives, which is perfectly fine, but can take a view about what they have seen, can maybe invite some of the people who asked questions or try to debate with some of the leaders individually, whatever, but that the core of the journalism was about the world and its population being able to see clearly what the views of these leaders were with regard to the most important questions from society and direct from people, and that there's an opportunity for them to answer the questions without the moderator or the person who's in charge of managing and chairing debate being biased in any way or trying to spin conversations or get answers that relate to his or her own bias. So the person who moderated would be somebody, I would say, who was very apolitical, didn't run around the place expressing their own views about politicians, about their political leanings, whether right or left or whatever, they would be kind of invisible. And in a way, what happens then is it's the public having a direct connection with those leaders and asking the questions. And then those leaders, just like a boxing match, to be honest, a whole set of rules, but done in a very professional, very open, very transparent way. That's where we need to go with these hugely important topics. And so that's what I would see as a positive outcome from here, is that, yes, Tucker Carlson, this is a really positive start to a big change that's needed. But I think it needs to go much, much further. And I am sure that these guys would agree. They would say, of course, they can only make it better. This can only make our system more transparent when it comes to finding out what's going on, and getting what I've often referred to as a better relative truth, a higher score when it comes to relative truth. So make sure to watch that interview and comment on what you thought of it and whether you felt it, like I do, that it is absolutely a pivotal moment in journalism and a very positive change that's occurring, and that we need much, much more of. So thank you for listening. See you soon.